Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where your alarm clock is a rooster, your shower is a bucket of cold water, and your morning commute is a slippery, muddy path through a village that smells like a mix of unwashed laundry and livestock. You trudge out of your straw-filled mattress just as the first pale light sneaks over the horizon. But the streets outside are still pitch black, except for the flicker of a few torches or lanterns held by bleary-eyed townsfolk. There's no cozy bed to crawl back into. This is medieval morning, where comfort took a holiday, and survival was the priority. Spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't last a day here without wanting to scream into a feather pillow, or the closest sack of grain. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who's braving this historical bedtime trip with me right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awake in the dim cold of your one-room hut, the straw mattress beneath you itching like you've rolled in a bed of needles overnight. There's no alarm clock besides the roosters. They start their relentless crowing hours before sunrise. You stumble out, feet meeting the cold, uneven dirt floor, trying not to stub your toes on the scattered tools and pots that didn't quite get picked up last night. The air is thick with a mix of smoke from the dying hearth fire, stale beer from last night's village feast, and something vaguely animalistic, probably the goats that share the alley outside. It's not exactly a spa morning. The streets are still dark, and you squint against the flickering torches held by other early risers. Street lamps are a luxury unknown here. The cobblestones are slick with last night's rain, and worse, with, well, whatever the livestock left behind. You do a little hop step to avoid the more hazardous spots, cursing silently. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were actually more unsanitary than some modern urban slums, or if nostalgia paints them worse than they were. Your first stop is the well, the lifeline for everyone, because running water was the stuff of fairy tales. The bucket feels heavy as you pull it up, and you brace yourself for the icy, murky water that will be your morning drink and wash-up supply. There's no hot water, no soap, just cold and probably a few floaters. Speaking of bathing, people often only bathed a few times a year, partly because water was scarce and partly because they feared opening pores to disease, which, by the way, was everywhere. You rub your hands together and splash some of that chilly water on your face, grimacing at the shock. The air still smells faintly of yesterday's cooking fire, mixed with dung from the nearby stables. You remind yourself not to inhale too deeply. This is life in the medieval town before dawn. The sounds start to build. The distant crowing grows louder. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer rings out from across the village. And the low murmur of villagers preparing for the day blends into a rough symphony of daily medieval life. No quiet here, no soft waking playlists, just raw, gritty noise that you have to roll with. You pull on your clothes, a rough wool tunic that feels like a medieval version of a scratchy blanket, with layers that won't save you from the cold morning air, but will make you sweat later in the day. You hesitate for a moment, wishing for modern slippers instead of bare feet or stiff leather shoes that pinch your toes. But those dreams must wait. As you step outside, the village slowly wakes. Smoke curls from chimneys, dogs bark, and children, still half asleep, shuffle to the small schoolhouse or to tend animals. Your nose wrinkles at a familiar pungency, the smell of fish guts dumped near the river, a less than pleasant reminder that refrigeration is centuries away. You remember the strange medieval practice of using animal dung as sunscreen? Yes, seriously, because they believed it protected skin from the sun. It's not exactly an upgrade from today's lotions. And honestly, You'd rather be dealing with your current morning woes than that kind of beauty routine. The sun edges higher, promising a new day filled with hard labor, uncertain meals, and a world where you'd have to be tougher than a knight's armor just to make it through dawn. But for now, you take a deep breath of the cool, muddy air, brace yourself for the chaos to come, and trudge onwards. Welcome to medieval morning. By now, the sun's climbing higher, but your stomach is still grumbling. You wander toward the communal hearth, hoping breakfast will be something more than yesterday's leftovers. Or worse, just another bowl of gruel. Let's be honest. Medieval meals were, well, uninspired at best. Your plate probably a thick, gloopy porridge made from barley or oats, tasting like something that fell out of a horse's feed bag. If you're lucky, there might be some stale bread or a small chunk of cheese to chew on. Meat. That's a luxury reserved for the lords or special occasions like festivals or a neighbor's wedding. For peasants, protein came mostly from peas, beans, and occasional eggs, plus the odd fish if you lived near a river or coast. And don't even get me started on spices. Unlike the rich folks who traded silk and pepper across continents, your food is almost flavorless, with maybe a pinch of salt if you're lucky. You might drown your gruel in sour milk or beer to make it less miserable, but it's still basically a bland swamp in a bowl. Historians still argue whether the medieval diet was so bad it caused widespread malnutrition, or if the body simply adapted to survive on this culinary monotony. If famine hits, you'd be stuck with even less: bark, roots, or anything else that might pass as food, which, spoiler alert, tastes terrible and doesn't fill you up much. Famines were terrifyingly common, thanks to bad harvests, war, or disease wiping out crops. Your survival odds nosedive in those times. Here's a quirky twist. Medieval people sometimes ate cockentrice, a bizarre concoction where they sewed the front half of a pig onto the back half of a capon, a type of chicken, and roasted the stitched-up creature whole. Imagine that showstopper at a feast, a real-life Franken-pig chicken. Fancy lords loved the spectacle, but for you, a regular folk, this was pure fantasy. You grab a hunk of rye bread, hard as a brick, but good enough to stave off hunger for a bit. Chewing slowly, you wonder if the food situation will get any better today. Probably not. Meanwhile, your neighbor sneezes violently, reminding you that medieval people had no clue about germs. Just a bunch of superstitions about bad air and curses causing illness. When someone got sick, you either prayed for a miracle or turned to a wise woman for herbal remedies. Historians still argue whether medieval folk medicine had any real scientific basis or if it was mostly hopeful guesswork sprinkled with witchy vibes. As you trudge back outside, your stomach slightly fuller but still grumbling, you notice the butcher's shop already buzzing. You peek at the hanging carcasses and shudder. The meat isn't refrigerated and sometimes had maggots or flies crawling over it. Hygiene wasn't exactly top priority. The food situation in medieval times wasn't just about taste. It was a daily struggle to survive. Hunger shaped everything from your mood to your strength to your ability to work. Being a picky eater here, forget it. You'd starve before finishing your plate. You're already craving a modern snack, but instead you trudge onward, knowing the next meal might be just as grim. The medieval diet wasn't designed for enjoyment, but endurance. And honestly, that's enough to make you want to curl back under your scratchy wool blanket and pretend this nightmare isn't real. You wipe your hands on your coarse tunic, but it's not going to get rid of that lingering smell. Hygiene in medieval times, let's just say it was a whole different level of don't ask, don't smell. Bathing was rare and often suspiciously avoided, partly because water was precious and partly because people thought it opened their pores to disease. So, no refreshing morning showers here, more like the occasional splash of cold, sometimes stagnant, water when you could get it. You probably wouldn't last a day trying to hold your breath around the medieval village. Imagine narrow streets lined with open sewers, livestock roaming freely, and waste dumped into rivers that doubled as drinking water sources. The combination created a noxious cloud of smells so potent it could knock out a modern person within seconds. You learn quickly to breathe through your mouth or hold a handkerchief over your nose, hoping it helps. And here's a fun but gross fact. People often used smoke or strong herbs like rosemary to mask the stench. Smoke from fires and braziers wasn't just for warmth or cooking. It was basically medieval air freshener. But it didn't work too well, especially when you're standing next to a heap of manure. Bathhouses existed, but weren't exactly clean spas. They were communal, sometimes gender segregated, and often breeding grounds for diseases rather than cures. Interestingly, these public baths declined during the later Middle Ages, partly due to fear of spreading illness, and partly because religious leaders frowned upon them, linking them with sinful behavior. Historians still argue whether this shift contributed more to public health or decline. Your clothes are another source of odor and discomfort. Without frequent washing, fabrics held onto grime, sweat, and the village's signature funk. Changing clothes wasn't a daily habit either. Often, people owned only a couple of outfits, so washing them was a chore rarely done. Smelly clothes were just part of the package. You try to imagine what a medieval deodorant might be like, and surprise. People did try to use perfumes and herbal concoctions, sometimes carrying small sachets of dried flowers or aromatic herbs. But these were pricey, so most villagers stuck with whatever masking techniques they could find. Washing your teeth. Forget it. Toothbrushes, as we know them, didn't exist, and dental hygiene was minimal at best. People chewed on sticks or used cloths to wipe teeth. But tooth decay and bad breath were common complaints. You smile carefully, thinking about the medieval version of a dentist, probably more of a tooth puller with no anesthesia. So, you shamble through the day smelling like a walking farmyard, dodging dirt and worse, and doing your best not to gag when neighbors pass by. You're learning that medieval cleanliness was less about fresh and more about functional survival in a grimy, challenging world. You pull on your clothes. Heavy wool that's more torture device than comfort. Imagine layers of scratchy, itchy fabric clinging to your skin, soaked through with sweat by midday but still chilly in the morning. Fashion wasn't about looking good here. It was about surviving the cold and protecting your body from the elements and rough work. Comfort. That was a luxury medieval life simply didn't offer. The poor mostly wore wool and linen, both of which feel like sandpaper compared to your favorite soft t-shirt. Wool was great for warmth, but could be unbearably itchy and heavy when wet. And linen was lighter, but didn't last long under constant use. You probably wouldn't survive a day in these clothes without dreaming of modern fabrics. Clothes were often reused and passed down through families, patched and darned until they barely held together. Washing was infrequent, making your outfit smell less like a clean garment and more like a relic of every bad smell in the village. Speaking of odors, the medieval concept of clean clothes was very different from ours. Sometimes clean meant not covered in mud. Remember that medieval dung sunscreen from earlier? Well, the truth is, many people covered their faces with all sorts of bizarre mixtures to protect or beautify their skin. Lead-based cosmetics, for example, were popular among the wealthy despite being toxic. Historians still argue whether these early beauty rituals caused more harm than good, or if they were just misunderstood. Your shoes are another story. Most peasants wore simple leather shoes, often open-toed or with minimal protection. After trudging through muddy, rocky paths, your feet ache and develop sores. Footwear was made to last, not to pamper, and blisters were just part of the package. And forget about buttons or zippers. Medieval clothing fastened with brooches, pins, or simple ties. which could come undone at the worst moments, leaving you fumbling to keep your tunic closed. You try to imagine managing a wardrobe malfunction while hauling hay or dodging a bossy village elder. There's also the matter of fashion signaling social status. Your clothes told everyone exactly where you stood. Nobles wore vibrant colors dyed with rare plants and minerals, while peasants stuck to dull, natural tones. You'd instantly stand out in the wrong clothes, which could mean trouble, so keeping to your station was safer. So, as you tug at your itchy sleeves and adjust your loose belt, you can't help but fantasize about soft cotton pajamas or stretchy jeans. Medieval fashion was survival gear, not style. And surviving in it was an itch you couldn't scratch. Your day officially kicks off with work, a back-breaking, endless cycle of tasks that define medieval life. Whether you're a peasant in the fields or a craftsman in a cluttered workshop, the sheer physical effort required would have you begging for a nap by mid-morning. Imagine hauling heavy sacks of grain, wielding primitive tools that feel like they're made to punish your hands, or bending over endless rows of crops while the sun beats down mercilessly. Work wasn't just exhausting, it was constant. There was no 5-day work week, no coffee breaks, and certainly no comfy office chair. Instead, you faced hours of stooping, lifting, hammering, and tilling from sunrise until sunset. The medieval workday was dictated by sunlight. So in winter, you might only get a few hours, but the intensity never let up. Tools were simple and often inefficient. Your plow might be pulled by oxen, but the iron blade was dull, and you'd have to stop frequently to clear stones or repair broken parts. Craftsmen used hand tools that demanded precision and patience, both of which you're quickly losing as your fingers ache and your back stiffens. Historians still argue whether the medieval agricultural revolution was as revolutionary as once thought or if it merely scratched the surface of productivity. Here's a quirky fact. Some peasants used weeding sticks, basically sharpened sticks they jabbed into the soil to remove weeds by hand. No mechanized weed whackers here, just lots of bending and stabbing. The guilds controlled skilled labor, and membership was a coveted but difficult status to achieve. If you were a blacksmith, you'd spend years as an apprentice, learning to forge swords and horseshoes while your mentor glared over your shoulder. The pressure to produce flawless work was intense, especially since a bad horseshoe could mean a knight's fall in battle, or your own swift punishment. And don't forget the seasonal rhythms. Harvest time was madness. Everyone had to drop everything to gather crops before the rains destroyed them. Missing the harvest meant starvation in winter. The relentless schedule shaped everything, from festivals to market days to church services. Physical injuries were common: splinters, cuts, bruises, and worse. Without modern medicine, even a small wound could become life-threatening. Protective gear was minimal, and safety regulations non-existent. You learned fast to keep your fingers away from sharp blades and avoid heavy loads that might crush you. The pace is grueling, the tools are primitive, and your body aches from the effort. You wonder how anyone could keep going day after day without collapsing from exhaustion. But that was medieval work. Relentless, unforgiving, and utterly exhausting. Just as your muscles start to protest, another invisible enemy is already lurking: disease. You can't see it, but it's everywhere, in the water, in the air, on your hands, and even in the food you just ate. The medieval world was a petri dish for illness, with plagues, fevers, and infections stalking the population like dark shadows. You'd be wise to watch your step and your cough, because catching something nasty here could mean a quick, painful death. One of the most infamous scourges was the Black Death, a bubonic plague that wiped out about a third of Europe's population in the 14th century. But before and after that, countless smaller outbreaks of diseases like smallpox, measles, and typhus ran rampant. Sanitation was abysmal, and the concept of germs was non-existent. People believed bad smells, called miasma, were the cause of illness. They burned herbs or carried sweet-smelling pomanders, hoping to ward off disease. Spoiler: it didn't work. Medieval medicine was a mix of superstition, religious rituals, and a few practical treatments. Bloodletting was popular, yes. Someone would cut your veins to balance your humors, which often left patients weaker or dead. You might be given potions brewed from herbs, animal parts, or even crushed minerals. Historians still argue whether any medieval remedies had real healing properties, or were mostly placebo with a dash of hope. Here's a weird one. Some medieval doctors believed that kissing a donkey's nose could cure certain diseases. You'd probably pass on that treatment. Hospitals, where they existed, were more like places to pray than to heal. The sick were often isolated in filthy wards with little comfort. Religious orders ran many medical facilities, mixing care with prayer and penance. Disease didn't just kill individuals, it could topple entire economies and social structures. Labor shortages after plagues forced changes in wages and social mobility, shaking up the feudal system. The fear of illness shaped everything from travel to social interactions. People avoided the sick, sometimes brutally quarantining villages to stop outbreaks. You're already feeling a tickle in your throat or a bit of fatigue, and you realize surviving medieval life meant dodging not just physical dangers, but the invisible ones that could end you in days. No wonder people clung tightly to faith and superstition when science offered so little comfort. Your hard day suddenly takes a sharp turn when you find yourself facing medieval justice, a system that's equal parts spectacle, terror, and arbitrary cruelty. There's no legal aid or appeals hotline, just the loud echo of the town crier announcing your fate, and a crowd eager for drama. You might have tripped over a neighbor's chicken, stolen a loaf of bread, or offended the local lord, and your punishment could be swift and brutal. Medieval courts were less about fairness and more about enforcing social order, often through public punishments designed to shame and intimidate. Stocks, pillories, and whipping posts were common sights, and people would gather as if attending a grim festival, gawking at the punished and sometimes joining in with jeers or sympathy. You'd be wise to avoid becoming the star of such a show. One of the more infamous penalties was branding or mutilation, cutting off ears or noses as a permanent mark of guilt. Execution was reserved for serious crimes, and methods ranged from hanging to beheading. But justice wasn't always consistent. Your social status often dictated how harshly you were treated. Nobles might get a slap on the wrist for crimes that would have commoners hanging by sunset. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was a chaotic mess or an effective deterrent in a harsh world. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. A quirky but true bit. Trial by ordeal was a real thing. Accused people might have to hold a red-hot iron or be thrown into a river to see if they survived. Their fate supposedly decided by divine intervention. Imagine the stress. Luckily, that practice faded over time, but you'd probably want to skip that court date. In some towns, the justice system included professional executioners and judges. But in many rural areas, local lords or village elders dispensed justice however they saw fit. Bribery, favoritism, and superstition often shaped verdicts. You watch a neighbor dragged to the stocks for petty theft, their face flushed with humiliation and the smell of rotten eggs tossed by the crowd. You shudder, realizing that justice here isn't about rehabilitation or fairness. It's a public performance designed to maintain control through fear. So if you ever find yourself on the wrong side of medieval law, good luck, you'll need it. Your day unfolds under the unyielding gaze of religion. Because in medieval times, faith wasn't just a Sunday thing. It was the rhythm and rulebook of life itself. The church's shadow stretched over every moment, from the dawn prayers that rouse you before the sun to the festivals that interrupt your hard work with days of solemnity and celebration. Missing a Mass, or failing to confess was unthinkable. And sin wasn't just a personal fail, it threatened your very afterlife. You shuffle toward the village church, its stone walls cold and echoing with whispered prayers. Inside, the scent of burning candles and incense swirls in the chilly air. The priest's booming Latin sermon might be incomprehensible to you, but the ritual, the kneeling, the crossing yourself, the chorus of Amen is deeply ingrained. The church is the heart of the community, the place where births, marriages, and deaths are marked with equal solemnity. Here's a fun detail. Medieval people believed that evil spirits could hide in unbaptized babies or unblessed objects. So rituals weren't just tradition. They were armor against a hostile spiritual world. Historians still argue whether medieval religion was a source of comfort or an oppressive control mechanism, or both. Religious festivals break the monotony, but they come with their own challenges. Fasting periods where food is restricted, sometimes to just fish or bread, forcing you to endure hunger pangs alongside your spiritual duties. The calendar is packed with saints' days, holy weeks, and feast days, each with its own rituals and expectations. Superstition and religion blend in curious ways. People carried charms, avoided unlucky numbers, and believed in miracles and curses with equal fervor. Pilgrimages to holy sites were common but perilous journeys, sometimes taking months and exposing travelers to bandits and illness. The church also controlled education and literacy, so priests were among the few who could read and write, giving them enormous power over knowledge and information. You probably wouldn't get much schooling, but you'd be well versed in prayers and hymns. As you kneel for evening prayers, the flickering candlelight casts long shadows, and the chants soothe you even as they remind you of the heavy weight of faith and fear that colors every choice you make. Religion here is a life sentence and a lifeline, a constant companion that shapes everything from birth to death. Your place in the medieval world is part of a sprawling, tangled hierarchy known as the feudal system, a structure that defines who you are, who you answer to, and even what your future might look like. You're not just a person. You're a piece in a vast, complex game where loyalty, land, and power are the main currencies. One wrong move, and your fate can flip like a poorly tossed coin. If you're a peasant, most of your life is spent working land owned by a lord, who's technically your boss, landlord, and protector all rolled into one. The lord grants you a plot to farm, but in return you owe him taxes, labor, and sometimes military service. Your freedom is limited. You can't just pick up and leave whenever you want without serious consequences. The social ladder here is more like a steep cliff. Moving up is rare and risky. Lords themselves answer to even higher nobles or directly to the king, who holds the ultimate power, though his reach is often more symbolic than practical in far-off villages like yours. The politics behind this power play can be messy and brutal. Alliances made and broken, battles waged, and families betrayed. Historians still argue whether feudalism was a rigid caste system or a more flexible, negotiated set of relationships. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some lords employed court jesters not just for laughs, but as unofficial truth-tellers who could mock nobility with fewer repercussions. Your role, though, is far less glamorous, more about hauling crops and avoiding trouble. You've heard tales of knights, clad in shining armor, galloping to battle with honor. But the reality is often less romantic. Knights were part warriors, part nobles, part landowners, balancing fighting with managing estates and keeping their vassals in line. Vassals were lesser lords or knights who swore loyalty and military support to more powerful lords in exchange for land or protection. This web of relationships is a constant balancing act. Betrayal or failure to meet obligations could result in losing your land or worse. Loyalty wasn't just expected, it was enforced, often violently. As you rest your aching back for a moment, you realize that in this futile game, your life is rarely your own. It's a series of obligations, debts, and loyalties, all wrapped up in a social order designed to keep power firmly in the hands of a few. Night falls over the medieval village like a heavy velvet curtain, blanketing the worn cobblestones and timbered houses in a deep, shadowy hush. After a grueling day spent bending over fields, hauling heavy loads, or tending to endless chores, the workday's end should signal relief, a chance to rest and relax. But in medieval times, relaxation seldom meant quiet or comfort as we might imagine today. Instead, the night often ushered in a form of entertainment that could be described as bizarre, raw, and sometimes brutally savage. What passes for amusement in this dark age would likely strike the modern binge watcher clutching a remote as strange or even disturbing. There were no cushy sofas or warm blankets to curl up with a tale or a film, no flickering screens offering endless escapism with a few clicks. Instead, entertainment was a living, noisy, often dangerous affair. A public event that could spark adrenaline, laughter, fear, and camaraderie all at once. When the sun sank below the horizon, villagers looked to distraction, to gatherings and spectacles that today's sensibilities would find jarring. This was entertainment forged from the very grit of survival and the stark realities of medieval life. The social fabric of these times wove entertainment tightly with spectacle. Public displays were major community events, occasions when the daily monotony gave way to theatricality, conflict, and shared excitement. Among the nobles, jousts and tournaments dazzled with galloping horses, gleaming armor, and clashing lances. Choreographed battles of honor and prowess. These displays of chivalry and martial skill were awe-inspiring, a chance for the aristocracy to demonstrate power, wealth, and valor in a grand, polished performance. But for the common folk, entertainment was rarely so refined. The village crowd's favorite spectacles veered towards the raw and visceral. Cockfights, grueling battles between roosters, spurred and savaged in small arenas, drew cheering crowds. Bear baiting, a grim spectacle involving chaining a bear to a post and releasing dogs to harass and attack it, was horrifying by modern standards, but a popular form of thrill. The bear's roars and the dog's snarls echoed through the night, weaving a terrifying symphony for onlookers who saw it as sport. Worse still were public executions, macabre gatherings where justice was meted out in full view. The condemned were often sentenced to brutal deaths, hanging, beheading, or worse, and the crowd gathered as if attending a grim festival, some jeering, others praying, all witnessing the stark consequences of law and order. The thought of being thrown to a bear or facing execution before a jeering crowd chills your blood, but such scenes were woven into the medieval entertainment tapestry. Surprisingly, some of the most chaotic and beloved pastimes were games that defy easy description today. Take mob football, a wild, unruly contest played in village streets with few, if any, formal rules. Entire villages might take part in these matches, where the ball could be a leather pouch or a pig's bladder, and the goal might lie miles away, sometimes at the edge of neighboring villages. Imagine a sprawling crowd, hundreds of men and boys, pushing, shoving, and crashing through muddy lanes, shouting and brawling. Injuries, broken bones, and bruises were common and accepted. It was less a game and more a clash of wills, an adrenaline-fueled release from the grinding toil of daily life. Historians continue to debate whether mob football was a distant ancestor to modern sports like soccer or rugby, or simply an outlet for medieval villagers' unruly spirits, perhaps a bit of both. Regardless, it was a moment when communities bonded through chaos, sweat, and the shared thrill of a wild contest. For those seeking calmer respite, the night sometimes brought storytelling and music. Quiet flames flickering in hearths and around campfires. Bards and minstrels wandered from town to town, weaving tales that blended history, myth, and pure invention. Their songs sang of brave heroes, vengeful gods, cunning tricksters, and monstrous beasts. The stories served not only as entertainment, but also as vessels of cultural memory, shaping how people understood their origins and the world around them. Listening to these tales, villagers could momentarily escape their harsh realities, transported into worlds of wonder, magic, and moral lessons. Amid these entertainments, you might also encounter collectors of curiosities and trophies, keepers of objects both strange and symbolic. Nobles and travelers often prized stuffed exotic animals, like crocodiles or lions, creatures seen as symbols of status and power. These oddities fascinated villagers as well, reminding them of distant lands and daring hunts. And yet, beneath these grand curiosities lay simple human desires, connection to history, identity, and prestige. For instance, the bizarre practice of using crocodile dung as sunscreen, both repulsive and ingenious, speaks to the odd ways medieval people coped with the natural world and its challenges. So, while medieval entertainment was far from the cozy, gentle affairs of modern times, it fulfilled crucial social functions. It offered moments of escape, solidarity, and release from the harshness of daily life. It reinforced social bonds, vented communal tensions, and maintained cultural continuity. Yet, after a day steeped in physical hardship and the omnipresent smells of livestock, sweat, and smoke, you might wonder how much of this chaos and carnage you could truly endure, and whether the thrills of a bear baiting or the frenzy of a mob football match could ever really feel like fun. As dawn's first light creeps over the horizon, the village slowly stirs awake. The cold air tastes sharp with morning frost, and the sky is a pale wash of soft pink and lavender hues. You take a deep breath and begin preparing yourself for a journey. Not a simple stroll, but a venture into the wide and often unforgiving world beyond your familiar fields and homes. Today, you set out on the medieval road, and the prospect of travel presses heavily on your mind. Unlike the modern world, where paved highways stretch smooth and reliable, and navigation devices whisper directions into your ear, the medieval traveler must wrestle with a far more demanding reality. Roads are scarcely more than rough dirt tracks, meandering uncertainly through forests, hills, and fields. They bear the scars of seasons past, muddy ruts carved by wagon wheels, patches of uneven stone, tangled roots, and eroded banks. In the rainy months, the trails turn into sticky quagmires, swallowing boots and dragging weary feet. When winter's breath arrives, heavy snow blocks mountain passes and blankets the landscape, erasing any sign of a path and threatening to strand travelers for days on end. Your pack is small, for every extra pound is a burden, every additional item a risk of slowing your pace. There is no modern convenience here, no cell phone to call for help, no map app to offer a reassuring route. Instead, you rely on memory, hearsay, and an instinct honed by necessity. The direction you follow is rough, uncertain, a hope stitched together with prayers and common sense. There are no signs or milestones every mile. Instead, the landscape itself serves as a guide. A crooked tree, a distant hilltop, the shape of the river winding alongside the trail. Along the road, inns offer refuge, though don't expect luxury or comfort. These inns are far from the serene bed and breakfasts of modern travel brochures. More often than not, they are cramped, smoky, and alive with raucous voices. The air is thick with the scent of burning wood, sweat, stale ale, and the sharp tang of unwashed bodies. You share a crowded room with merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers. The sounds of snoring, coughing, and restless feet filling the space. The straw mattresses are thin and damp. The linens coarse and rarely cleaned. Bed bugs and fleas are unwelcome companions in your fleeting rest. Meals at the Indian are simple and predictable. A coarse loaf of bread, a bowl of pottage, a thick stew of vegetables and sometimes scraps of meat, and watered ale or sour wine. While this fare might resemble your daily diet, the weariness of travel saps your appetite, leaving you to nibble cautiously and drink sparingly. Yet, no matter how humble, these inns provide a vital pause on a journey fraught with hazards. For without such stops, you risk pushing too far in the day's waning light, forcing you to sleep under the open sky, vulnerable to the elements and dangers lurking in shadowed woods. Among the most persistent dangers that haunt medieval roads are the bandits and highwaymen. Unlike modern times, where law enforcement patrols roads and investigates crime, the medieval traveler walks a path where a law is distant or absent, and safety often depends on the luck of traveling with an armed group or the goodwill of local militias. Bandits strike quickly, using the cover of forests or forgotten crossroads. Their weapons are brutal: swords, clubs, and bows. No amount of pleading or bribes always guarantees safety. Even nobles, with their retinues and wealth, were not immune. Stories abound of knights and merchants alike robbed or slain in dark woods. Historians debate the nature of these bandit gangs. Were they mere criminals preying on the weak, or desperate outlaws caught in the social upheavals of their times, sometimes viewed as folk heroes by local villagers? The truth may lie somewhere in between, a tangled web of survival, rebellion, and opportunism. Regardless, the threat they posed was very real and never far from the traveler's mind. Superstition mingled deeply with the dangers of travel. Many carried pilgrim badges, small metal tokens worn proudly, believed to provide divine protection. These badges, often stamped with images of saints or holy sites like Santiago de Compostela, served as talismans against evil. Whether or not they truly warded off misfortune is lost to history, but the confidence they gave was invaluable to the traveler facing the uncertainties ahead. Alongside badges, many carried charms, whispered prayers, or religious relics close to their hearts. The road was as much a spiritual trial as a physical one. Nature itself was a relentless adversary. Weather could shift suddenly. A sudden storm could turn the trail into a sea of mud, thunder booming overhead while torrents of rain hammered down, flooding the nearby rivers and washing away fragile bridges. Winter's early snows blocked mountain passes and froze rivers, turning travel into a test of endurance against cold and isolation. The night brought its own fears: the howls of wolves in distant woods, the rustle of unseen animals, the chilling wind slipping beneath cloaks. In these moments, your only defense might be a prayer whispered in the dark, or the tight grip of your traveling companion's hand. Travel was also costly. Horses and wagons, if you had them, required care and feed. Inns and tolls drained your purse. Food had to be carried or bought along the way. For peasants, long-distance travel was rare and usually tied to necessity: pilgrimages, trent, or summons to a lord's court. For merchants, travel was part of life, but came with constant risk and expense. For soldiers, it was often forced upon them by orders and the chaos of war. You think back to your last walk down the muddy village path, the cold seeping through your worn boots, the weight of your pack pressing into your shoulders. You shudder at the memory of the slippery slopes, the biting wind, the ache in your legs as the road stretched endlessly before you. Medieval travel was not an adventure to be taken lightly. It was a test of endurance, courage, and luck. A harsh chapter in the story of survival. Yet, despite its hardships, travel was a thread connecting disparate worlds, a force that spread news, goods, and ideas across kingdoms. It was how merchants reached markets far beyond their home villages, how pilgrims sought spiritual solace at holy shrines, and how nobles asserted their influence over scattered lands. Each journey was a story of its own, a microcosm of the medieval world's challenges, dangers, and small victories. You stumble wearily through the narrow, rutted lane that leads to your village, the evening's chill pressing against your back like a silent weight. Ahead, the familiar silhouette of your home looms, a modest structure, unremarkable in its simplicity, yet a sanctuary against the harshness of the outside world. As you cross the threshold, the thin walls seem to close around you, wrapping you in a smoky embrace that is far from the modern dream of cozy warmth. Instead, your medieval dwelling feels more like a cramped, smoky cave, a shared refuge filled with the daily chaos of people, animals, and the unsettling knowledge that somewhere, hidden in the shadows, a family of rodents might be nesting. You try not to think too much about the latter. Your home is typical of the medieval common folk. One or two small rooms at most, built with wattle and daub, a practical yet humble construction of interwoven sticks plastered with mud and straw. The walls, cracked and uneven, bear the marks of seasons past, stained by rain and soot, occasionally cracked but still standing stubbornly against the elements. Above, the roof of golden thatch is thick yet porous, leaking its share of raindrops during storms, dripping into wooden buckets hastily set beneath or directly onto the dirt floor. The thought of a dry, sealed home with glass windows feels like a distant luxury. You squint toward the dim, diffuse light filtering through a small window pane, made not of glass but oiled parchment, stretched tight to hold out the wind and rain. The faint light casts muted patterns on the walls, barely illuminating the dust particles drifting lazily in the stagnant air. There is no electric bulb here, no warm tungsten glow. The hearth is the only source of light and life in this shadowed space. The hearth commands the room's center, a shallow pit rimmed with flat stones, perpetually smoldering with embers and flickering flames. It serves multiple crucial purposes: a place for cooking the simple meals that sustain you, the sole provider of heat against the biting cold, and a reluctant source of light that barely cuts through the gloom. There is no chimney to whisk away the smoke. Instead, it curls upward in thick, lazy tendrils, finding its way toward the low, blackened ceiling, settling like a perpetual haze. Your eyes sting, your throat itches, and your clothes absorb the scent of burning wood and smoke, a scent you carry with you from dawn till dusk. You cough quietly, hoping to keep the irritation from growing, wishing silently for fresh air that seldom graces this room. But fresh air here is a luxury afforded only to the open fields outside or the wide, windswept village streets. Inside, smoke and soot are as much a part of life as the dirt under your fingernails. The furniture is sparse, functional, and often homemade. A heavy wooden table stands off to one side, its surface scarred from years of chopping and eating. Nearby, a bench, roughly hewn from a fallen tree, serves as seating. A few wooden stools, uneven-legged and rickety, wait patiently for their next use. The bed, a simple frame roughly fashioned from timber, sits in a corner piled high with straw, a crude mattress that serves both for sleeping and storage. During the day, it might be folded or pressed against the wall, giving precious space for daily activities. The blanket that covers you smells faintly of smoke and dampness, worn thin from years of use. You try not to think about the fleas and lice that likely hitch a ride in your bedding, their presence tolerated as an inevitable discomfort of your existence. Animals often share your cramped quarters. Chickens might cluck softly at your feet, seeking warmth. A goat might rest in a corner, its breath heavy and musky. Pigs may grunt contentedly near the door, their bodies providing an odd sort of heat and life to the cold, stone floors. Their presence brings both comfort and chaos, providing companionship, warmth, and sometimes food, but also a steady source of noise, smell, and disease. This intermingling of species blurs the line between home and barn, a far cry from the modern ideal of a clean, private sanctuary. Privacy is a concept almost entirely absent here. Thin walls do little to muffle sound. The coughs and sneezes of family members, whispered conversations, children's laughter, or quarrels echo through the village rows and into your ears. Neighbors' daily lives unfold as clearly as your own. In such close quarters, privacy is a luxury few can claim. The intimacy of this shared existence brings comfort to some, but can weigh heavily on others. Storage is minimal and precious. Your few belongings, a well-worn cooking pot, a wooden spoon, a handful of simple tools, and perhaps a treasured piece of cloth or an heirloom token, are carefully preserved. There is no room for clutter. Every object has its place or risks becoming a target for hungry vermin. Rodents lurk in shadows and crevices, threatening food stores and sanity alike. The challenge of protecting your belongings from both nature and neighbors is constant. Historians still debate whether medieval homes were truly as miserable as they seem from the outside, or if the people of the time adapted to find warmth and comfort in the few pleasures available to them. Some argue that community bonds and familiarity with the environment allowed many to embrace their surroundings with a surprising degree of contentment. Yet, after the long day you've endured, with aching muscles and a mind fatigued by hardship, even this smoky, cramped shelter feels like a refuge, an anchor in a world otherwise unforgiving. You sink down onto your straw mattress, the coarse fabric scratching at your skin through thin clothing. Your body relaxes slightly despite the roughness beneath you. Closing your eyes, you try to let go of the grime clinging to your hands, the persistent odors that cling to your hair and clothes, and the aches embedded deep in your joints. This is home, the humble, harsh reality of medieval life. Outside, the village slowly quiets, shadows deepening as torches flicker and guttering candles are snuffed out. In this smoky cave, surrounded by the familiar chorus of low murmurs and rustling straw, you find a sliver of peace. The world beyond is fraught with hardship, danger, and endless toil. But here, in your simple wattle and daub shelter, you rest, if only for a moment. In the medieval world, the notion of school as a place where children gather under the guidance of a teacher to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic would have been foreign to most. For the majority of medieval folk, peasants, laborers, and common townspeople, the concept of formal education was not merely inaccessible, it was virtually non-existent. Schooling was a rare luxury, a privilege held tightly by a tiny, elite fraction of society. Education was largely reserved for boys born into wealthy families or those destined for the church. Future priests, monks, or scribes who would dedicate their lives to religious service and the painstaking transcription of manuscripts. For you, as an ordinary villager, literacy would be a rarity. Most likely, you would never spend a single minute in a classroom, nor would you have books or scrolls in your home. Instead, your education would be grounded in practicality and oral tradition, a hands-on learning shaped by the rhythms of village life and the demands of survival. Watching and doing would be your teachers. The principal centers of learning in this world were monasteries and cathedral schools. These grand institutions, often towering above the surrounding villages with their soaring spires and cloisters, served as hubs of knowledge. Here, young men learned Latin, the language of the church and scholarship, theology, and sometimes rudimentary arithmetic, skills necessary for reading sacred texts, conducting masses, and managing ecclesiastical affairs. Scribes labored over manuscripts, copying texts letter by painstaking letter, preserving religious and classical knowledge through a meticulous and often solitary craft. For the broader population, however, these schools were distant and daunting places, rarely within reach. Within the village, education took a different form altogether. Instead of Latin grammars or philosophy texts, you learned through example and tradition. Your family members, parents, siblings, grandparents, served as the primary instructors. A child watched the mother weaving cloth or cooking over the fire, the father wielding a plow or repairing tools, and gradually absorbed these essential skills through daily life. Learning was practical and immediate. How to plant and harvest crops, mend a torn garment, prepare food, or barter goods at the market. There were no formal lessons, no structured curricula, just the steady rhythm of work and observation, teaching what you needed to survive. In towns, there were sometimes informal schools, humble gatherings where a few children might learn the basics of reading, writing, or arithmetic under the tutelage of a local priest or literate artisan. But these were exceptions rather than the norm, and often restricted to boys. Girls, meanwhile, were largely excluded from formal education. Their learning centered instead on household skills, spinning, weaving, cooking, and childcare, preparing them for their expected roles within the home. The idea of a girl learning to read or write was a rarity, limited mostly to noble families or convents. You might imagine how different life would be if you could read the handwritten scrolls preserved by monks, illuminated with intricate designs and gold leaf, containing stories, prayers, laws, and ancient knowledge. Instead, knowledge traveled slowly in your world, carried by word of mouth, remembered and reshaped by each teller. This oral tradition preserved folklore, history, and customs, binding communities together with shared stories and wisdom. Yet, it also left room for error and myth, where misinformation mingled with truth and superstition flourished in the gaps. Without the ability to read or write, medieval people turned to charms, talismans, and folk remedies to explain and influence their world. Superstitions guided decisions about health, weather, and fate. A sick child might be soothed by whispered prayers or a protective amulet, a bad harvest blamed on curses or evil spirits. The boundaries between religion, magic, and daily life were fluid, reflecting a worldview where the unseen had tangible effects. In this context, education was less about individual advancement and more about fitting into the social order and sustaining the community. The skills you learned, patience, obedience, endurance, were just as vital as literacy might be in later centuries. They prepared you for the hard realities of medieval life, where survival depended on hard work, communal cooperation, and adherence to tradition. Your daily routine was shaped by this pragmatic learning. From dawn, you absorbed lessons in the field, the workshop, or the hearth, gaining knowledge passed down through generations. The villagers around you, blacksmiths, farmers, weavers, were living libraries, each holding expertise vital to the village's survival. Children learned by shadowing adults, gradually taking on responsibilities as their abilities grew. There were no grades or diplomas, only the gradual mastery of necessary skills. Yet, despite its limitations, this form of education was rich in other ways. The oral culture nurtured creativity and memory, fostering a deep connection to history and place. Stories, songs, and local customs kept alive the identity of communities, linking past to present. The wisdom of elders was revered, their words shaping young minds and hearts. Still, it's impossible to ignore the barriers that lack of formal education imposed. Without reading and writing, access to broader knowledge, legal rights, and political power was severely limited. Many remained trapped in cycles of poverty and ignorance, unable to challenge their circumstances or participate fully in governance. The Church's control over literacy reinforced its spiritual and temporal authority, creating a gatekeeper class that shaped medieval society's intellectual landscape. As you reflect on this world, you understand that education, in its narrow medieval form, was a patchwork of necessity, tradition, and faith. It was not the gateway to personal freedom or economic mobility that modern schooling promises. Instead, it was a tool of survival, social cohesion, and spiritual guidance. Critical, yes, but limited in scope and reach. In this way, your education is inseparable from your place in the village and the wider social order. You learn what is expected, how to live, and what roles to fill. The classroom is the land, the workshop, and the family hearth. The lessons are hard-won and practical, embedded in daily toil and communal life. While you may never master the written word or ponder philosophical questions, you possess a different kind of wisdom, rooted in experience, observation, and the rhythms of nature. And as night falls and the village gathers to share stories and songs around the fire, you become part of a living tradition, a thread in the vast tapestry of medieval life. You step hesitantly through the narrow doorway of a medieval village home and immediately sense how sharply the day will press upon you. The air is thick with the smell of smoke and damp earth, the clatter of pots and the low murmur of voices mixing with the distant bleating of goats and crowing roosters. Here, the life of a medieval woman unfolds, not as a choice, but as a chain of obligations, tight and unyielding, forged by the weight of centuries-old traditions and the relentless demands of survival. Freedom, you quickly learn, is a scarce and fragile thing in this world, as rare and precious as clean water in the village well. Your day begins long before the sun casts its first light over the fields. The coldness of dawn bites at your skin as you rise from a straw mattress, the fabric rough and itchy beneath your fingers. You exchange your thin, patched garments for the day's worn tunic and a coarse woolen cloak, mindful of the chill that will linger even beneath layers. For a peasant woman like yourself, the sun's rise marks the start of an exhausting cycle. Your hands, cracked and calloused from years of toil, know no rest. You are the family's backbone, the one who tills the soil beside the men, but also the one who tends the children, prepares meals from what the earth provides, cleans the cramped living space, and mends the tattered clothing that covers your family. You may rise early to milk goats, churn butter, or bake bread over the smoky hearth before turning to gather vegetables or haul water from the well. In market towns, you might also shoulder the responsibility of selling goods, bartering bundles of herbs, eggs, or homemade ale. Your voice rings out above the hubbub of traders, your wit sharpened by countless haggling encounters. Despite your hard work, the meager profits rarely bring respite, swallowed quickly by taxes, debts, and the ever-present threat of poor harvests. Noble women, by contrast, may live amid the thick stone walls of imposing manors or castles, draped in silks and furs that speak of status and power. Yet, their lives are bound by a different set of strictures. Marriage is rarely an affair of love, but a calculated alliance, an economic or political contract to secure land, loyalty, or peace between families. Your worth is often measured by your ability to produce heirs, particularly sons, and to manage the sprawling household and its many servants. Though you command authority within the domestic sphere, over servants, kitchens, and the running of estates, your voice in public affairs is muted. The great councils, courts, and councils of nobles are predominantly male domains. Historians debate whether medieval women wielded more agency behind closed doors than the official records suggest. Some noble women acted as regents or advisors, deftly navigating the treacherous waters of politics. But such roles were exceptions rather than the norm. Education for women is generally limited. Most girls learn domestic arts, spinning, weaving, cooking, and managing a household, rather than reading or writing. The ability to read is largely confined to women in convents or noble families. This lack of formal education restricts your capacity to engage with wider intellectual or theological debates that swirl beyond your village. Fear also shadows your days. Witch hunts and accusations of heresy disproportionately target women, especially those who are widowed, elderly, or otherwise marginalized. The threat of being labeled a witch or heretic hangs like a dark cloud, fostering suspicion and isolation within communities. You learn early to guard your words, to avoid behaviors that might draw unwanted attention. In the realm of health and body, desperate measures sometimes surface. Some women resort to homemade contraceptives, potion-like mixtures of crushed metals or bitter herbs, to control family size. These remedies are perilous, often toxic. But in a world where childbirth carries great risk and poverty is a constant threat, the gamble is one some are willing to take. Legal rights for women are few. Property ownership is typically controlled by fathers or husbands, leaving you dependent and vulnerable. Marriage binds you legally, and divorce is rare, fraught with social stigma and legal obstacles. Widowhood, while difficult, can offer a brief window of independence, but even then, your autonomy is constrained by family interests and societal expectations. Despite these hardships, women form vital networks of support. Knowledge is passed down through generations, remedies for illness, recipes, folk tales, and wisdom born of experience. Sisters, mothers, and neighbors exchange advice and comfort, reinforcing bonds that help weather life's storms. In quiet ways, women wield influence, shaping community values and maintaining cultural continuity. As the day wears on, you feel the weight of these expectations settle on your shoulders, heavy but familiar. Resilience becomes your armor, cunning your shield, and endurance your daily bread. Living as a medieval woman means navigating a world that often seems designed to confine and limit. Yet you discover in yourself a fierce vitality, a determination to survive, nurture, and sometimes to quietly resist. As dusk falls and the household gathers around the fire, sharing stories and songs, you realize that your role, though constrained, is no less vital to the fabric of medieval life. Your labor sustains families and communities. Your voice, though sometimes soft, carries the echoes of generations. And in the cycles of birth, work, and death, you find a fierce and stubborn hope, the quiet strength of women who endure. By now, the sun has begun its steady climb in the pale morning sky, casting a soft golden light over the village. The chill of dawn lingers, but it is the gnawing emptiness in your belly that sharpens your senses the most. You shuffle toward the communal hearth, the heart of the household, and the source of whatever sustenance the day will offer. Hunger tugs at you with a relentless grip, a reminder that nourishment is never guaranteed, and the medieval table is a place of necessity rather than pleasure. Breakfast, if it can even be called that, is unlikely to be a feast. In fact, meals during your time are notoriously uninspired, dictated more by what is available and affordable than by taste or variety. Your plate will probably hold a thick, gloopy porridge made from barley, oats, or rye, stirred into a dense mass that clings stubbornly to the wooden bowl. The taste bland at best, something like soggy straw, or, as village humor grimly has it, akin to the feed given to horses. You take a tentative spoonful, the grainy texture filling your mouth, dull and heavy, without a hint of sweetness or spice. If fortune smiles on you, there might be a scrap of stale bread, hard and crumbly, offering some much-needed chew to break the monotony. Sometimes a small piece of cheese, tangy and crumbly, adds a bit of relief to the otherwise uniform meal. Meat, however, is a rare luxury, reserved for the tables of lords or special celebrations such as festivals, weddings, or religious holidays. For common folk like yourself, protein mainly comes from humble sources: peas, beans, lentils, and the occasional egg if your family keeps chickens. If you live near a river or the coast, you might catch fish to supplement your diet, though even that is a privilege. Spices, those heralded treasures traded along long and dangerous routes, are mostly out of reach. Unlike the wealthy nobility who adorn their meals with pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and saffron, your food is near flavorless. Perhaps seasoned only with a pinch of coarse salt if you're lucky. To mask the blandness and sometimes sour taste of the porridge or bread, it's common to drown meals in sour milk or weak beer. These liquids make the meal easier to swallow, but do little to brighten its flavor. Historians continue to debate the effects of this monotonous diet. Some argue that the lack of variety and nutrients led to widespread malnutrition, stunting growth and weakening bodies. Others suggest that the human body adapted, finding a way to survive on such meager fare, though never thriving. It's clear that food scarcity and quality shaped every aspect of life, from the vigor of laborers in the fields to the resilience of children and the frailty of the elderly. When famine strikes, an all too common calamity caused by poor harvests, war, or disease, the situation becomes dire. You'd be forced to supplement your meager meals with bark, roots, and other wild foods that barely satisfy hunger and taste worse than imagined. Such times are brutal, and survival hinges on endurance, communal support, and sheer luck. Memories of famine linger like ghosts in village stories, warnings etched into the collective memory. In stark contrast to these austere realities, tales of the grand feasts of nobles and royalty abound. Feasts that feature exotic dishes and grotesque spectacles. Among the more bizarre delicacies is the cochintrice, a grotesque chimera stitched together from the front half of a pig and the back half of a capon, a castrated rooster. Roasted whole and presented as a marvel of culinary art. Such extravagant displays are the domain of the rich, whose tables overflow with wild game, spiced pastries, and wine. For common folk, these are fantasies, stories whispered around fires, but never tasted. You break off a hunk of rye bread, its hardness a challenge to your teeth, but a temporary balm to your hunger. Chewing slowly, you wonder if today's meals will improve. Experience tells you to temper expectations. The next meal will likely be much the same. Nearby, your neighbor sneezes violently, a sharp reminder of the medieval ignorance about disease transmission. Germ theory is centuries away. People believe illness is caused by miasma, bad air, or curses cast by witches or enemies. When sickness strikes, the village turns to prayer, superstition, or the dubious remedies dispensed by a local wise woman. Herbal concoctions, poultices, and charms. Scholars continue to debate whether medieval medicine had any genuine efficacy or was simply hopeful guesswork infused with superstition. Outside, the butcher's shop hums quietly with early activity. You peer inside at carcasses hanging from hooks, their surfaces mottled and unprotected from flies and insects. Without refrigeration or sanitation, meat spoils quickly, and buyers inspect it cautiously. The sight is unsettling, a reminder of the fragile line between nourishment and illness. Food in medieval times is not just about sustenance. It is a daily struggle, a factor that influences mood, energy, and survival. Being choosy about what you eat is a luxury you cannot afford. Meals are eaten quickly, with gratitude for any morsel that fills the stomach. Longing for the conveniences of the modern world, snacks, fresh produce, or even a simple hot cup of tea, you trudge onward, your stomach still rumbling, knowing the harsh reality awaits you again at the next meal. The medieval diet is not designed for pleasure, but endurance. And as you retreat beneath your scratchy wool blanket at night, the memory of today's meal fades into a grim acceptance of a life lived in constant hunger and resilience. You wipe your hands on the coarse fabric of your tunic, hoping to banish the lingering smell of sweat, smoke, and something fouler you'd rather not name. But you know the truth. No simple gesture will erase that pervasive odor. Hygiene in medieval times was, to put it mildly, a world apart from anything you recognize today. It was a time when "don't ask, don't smell" wasn't a saying, but a survival strategy. Bathing. That was a rare indulgence, often suspiciously avoided. Water was a precious resource, laboriously fetched from wells or streams and carefully conserved for drinking and cooking. Washing one's body was sometimes believed to open the pores, allowing disease to enter. A terrifying prospect in an age when illness seemed ever present and unexplained. So instead of refreshing morning showers, you get the occasional splash of cold, sometimes stagnant water if you are lucky enough to find it. Even then, the water might be lukewarm at best and a breeding ground for bacteria at worst. Strolling through the medieval village, your nostrils immediately register a hostile assault. The narrow streets are lined with open sewers, grimy trenches running along the sides, carrying waste from homes and animals. Livestock wander freely through these alleys, their hooves stirring up dust and manure. Rivers, which double as drinking water sources, often bear the brunt of discarded refuse. The combined effluvia creates a noxious cloud so potent that it could overwhelm a modern person within seconds. You quickly learn to breathe through your mouth or clutch a handkerchief, sometimes soaked in vinegar or herbs, over your nose, praying it dulls the worst of the stench. The villagers have their own coping mechanisms, from muttered curses to cheerful indifference. Smoke from fires and braziers is not only for warmth or cooking. It serves as a crude form of air freshener, filling the air with the scent of burning wood or aromatic herbs like rosemary. Yet, these efforts rarely manage to mask the overpowering odor of manure heaps, refuse piles, and human waste. The smell lingers like an unshakable shroud. Public bathhouses did exist, but their reputation was mixed. Far from the luxurious spas we might imagine, these communal baths were crowded, noisy, and often dirty. Sometimes segregated by gender, they could also be hotbeds for spreading disease. By the later Middle Ages, public baths declined significantly, partly because of fears that they spread infections, and partly due to religious leaders who condemned them as places of sin and temptation. Historians debate whether this decline was beneficial or detrimental to public health, but the result was clear. Bathing became less common. Your clothing offers little respite from the odor. Fabrics rarely see the soap and water that modern garments enjoy. Instead, clothes absorb grime, sweat, smoke, and the surrounding stink, clinging to you like a second skin. Most people own only a few garments, worn repeatedly and washed infrequently, as laundering is labor-intensive and water scarce. The scent of dirty wool and rough linen is a constant companion. Despite this, some medieval folk did attempt to mask their natural aromas. Perfumes and herbal sachets, small bundles of dried flowers or aromatic herbs, were carried by those who could afford them, often nobles or wealthy townsfolk. For common villagers, such luxuries were out of reach, and the best they could manage was fumigating their homes with smoke or rubbing their clothes with fragrant herbs. Dental hygiene was even more rudimentary. Toothbrushes, as you know them, did not exist. Instead, people might chew on twigs from certain trees believed to clean teeth or rub their gums with cloths. Despite these efforts, tooth decay, gum disease, and foul breath were common afflictions. The local dentist was usually a barber surgeon who pulled teeth without anesthesia, leaving patients to endure great pain. As you make your way through the day, You move through a world of filth and odor, your senses constantly assaulted. Your clothes smell faintly of sweat and smoke, your hair tangled and dusty. You dodge mud and refuse in the streets, smile politely as neighbors pass by, all while inwardly praying you don't inhale too deeply. Living in this grimy, challenging environment means accepting that medieval cleanliness was less about freshness and more about functional survival. It was a compromise between the limitations of the era's knowledge, resources, and beliefs, and the human desire for comfort, dignity, and health. You pull your garments over your head, a heavy woolen tunic that feels less like clothing and more like a punishment inflicted by the very fabric itself. The coarse fibers scratch and irritate your skin, a relentless itch beneath every fold and seam. The layers cling uncomfortably, a constant reminder of the medieval world's unforgiving demands. Unlike the soft, breathable fabrics you imagine today, your clothes are a far cry from comfort or fashion. Here, attire serves a singular purpose: survival. The cold air bites sharply, and you tug the thick wool closer around your body. Wool, prized for its warmth, is a double-edged sword. When dry, it shields against the biting chill. But once soaked through with sweat or rain, it turns heavy and clammy, weighing down your every movement. The dampness seeps into your skin, and the relentless itchiness intensifies. You grit your teeth, enduring the scratchy torment that comes with staying warm and protected. Linen, your other main fabric, offers a lighter alternative but comes with its own drawbacks. It's rough, less insulating, and prone to wear and tear under the daily rigors of medieval life. Your few linen garments show signs of repeated mending. Faded patches, ragged hems, and fraying threads where constant use has worn through the fibers. The idea of soft cotton or silk seems like a distant dream, a luxury only whispered about in tales of distant lands or noble courts. Clothing wasn't disposable. Garments were precious possessions, cherished and repaired relentlessly. You learn to wield needle and thread early, darning holes and patching tears until your clothes are barely recognizable beneath layers of mended fabric. Clothes often passed from parent to child, growing looser with age and thinner from wear. A testament to resourcefulness in a world where new textiles were expensive and scarce. Washing your clothes is no daily ritual, but a laborious task. Water must be drawn from wells or streams, heated over smoky fires, and mixed with ash or soapwort, a makeshift detergent. The process takes hours, and the harsh treatment further weakens the fabric. The scent of your clothes is not one of fresh cleanliness, but a mingling of smoke, sweat, earth, and the unmistakable musk of long use. In the medieval mindset, clean often meant simply free from visible mud or grime, not what modern noses would consider hygienic. You recall earlier how dung was sometimes used as sunscreen, a grim reminder that medieval beauty and care often intersected with strange and hazardous remedies. Lead-based cosmetics, popular among the wealthy, whitened faces but slowly poisoned the skin. A tragic price paid for pale complexions and social status. Whether these early beauty rituals caused more harm than good remains debated, but they underscore the era's complex relationship with health, appearance, and survival. Your shoes offer little relief. Made from thick, often stiff leather, they are designed for durability over comfort. Open toes or simple soles provide scant protection as you trudge through mud, rocks, and uneven paths. After hours on your feet, aches and blisters are inevitable, a painful accompaniment to the day's work. Footwear is something to be endured, not pampered, with repairs a constant necessity to extend their weary life. Medieval clothes are fastened not with buttons or zippers, but with brooches, pins, or ties fashioned from strips of cloth or leather. These simple closures sometimes come undone at the worst moments, forcing you to fumble with your tunic or cloak while hauling heavy loads or answering a sharp word from a village elder. The precarious nature of these fastenings means you develop quick reflexes and a knack for discreet adjustments. Clothing also serves as a clear marker of social status, a language understood by all in the medieval world. Nobles flaunt vibrant colors derived from rare and costly dyes, deep indigos from woad, brilliant reds from madder, or the elusive purple associated with royalty. Their garments are lavish, decorated with embroidery, fur trims, and fine linens. Peasants, by contrast, wear muted, earthy tones, the natural colors of undyed wool and linen, stained by smoke and toil. Wearing the wrong color or fabric could draw suspicion or worse, accusations of overstepping one's social bounds, making adherence to dress codes a matter of safety as well as pride. As you tug at your itchy sleeves and adjust the belt that cinches your waist, you can't help but imagine the softness of modern fabrics. Cotton pajamas, fleece jackets, stretchy jeans. Medieval clothing is a tool for enduring a harsh environment, not for expressing personal style or comfort. Each piece is worn with a resigned acceptance, a necessity to protect against cold, dirt, and injury, and to signal your place in a strict social order. Surviving the day in these clothes is a lesson in endurance. The constant itch, the heaviness of soaked wool, the roughness against your skin, all become part of your lived experience. Fashion is far from frivolous. It is functional armor against a relentless world. And in this harsh reality, you learn that sometimes the smallest comforts, a patch, a mended hem, a hand-woven scarf, are victories worth celebrating. Your day officially begins not with an alarm or a stretch, but with a faint, relentless tug of duty, the kind that tugs you from sleep before dawn's first light. As you step outside, the air is cool and crisp, the world still draped in shadows. There is no time to waste, for medieval life demands you be at work as soon as the sun rises, and hold your labor until it sets. There is no clock dictating hours, no coffee breaks, no moment to sit and rest in comfort. Instead, your day will stretch long and unforgiving, a cycle of relentless tasks that define the medieval existence. Whether you are a peasant laboring in the fields or a craftsman huddled in a dim, cluttered workshop, the physical effort required is staggering. Imagine hoisting heavy sacks of grain, bags that bite into your shoulders and threaten to unbalance your weary body. Your hands, raw and blistered, grip primitive tools that seem designed more to punish than to assist. Each wooden handle is rough and splintered, each blade dull and prone to bending or breaking. In the fields, you bend low for hours, tending endless rows of crops beneath the harsh sun that beats mercilessly, its heat stealing your strength and sapping your resolve. But exhaustion is not the only companion. Work is constant, unyielding. The medieval workday is not sliced into neat segments of hours and breaks. Instead, it is dictated by daylight, shorter in winter, stretching longer in summer. On dark winter mornings, you may have but a few hours to labor before the cold and dusk drive you indoors. Yet in those few hours, the intensity never lessens. Every moment is filled with effort, stooping, lifting, pounding, tilling. The rhythm is unbroken, demanding all your energy until the sky fades to twilight. The tools you wield are simple, often inefficient relics of an era before mechanization. The plow, a symbol of agrarian toil, is dragged across the earth by sturdy oxen, but its iron blade is often dull and prone to damage. Frequently, you must stop to clear stones, repair broken parts, or coax the stubborn oxen through muddy fields. The implements of labor are not made for ease, but endurance, reflecting a time when innovation moved slowly and survival depended on sweat and persistence. Among peasants, a humble tool called a weeding stick is a staple, essentially a sharpened stick used to jab and uproot weeds from the soil. Without mechanized equipment, weeding is a manual, repetitive, and back-breaking task, demanding patience and persistence. Each day's progress is measured not by ease but by the steady, painful elimination of obstacles. Skilled labor in towns and villages is governed by the guild system, a strict hierarchy of trades that regulates who may practice, how work is done, and the quality expected. Becoming a guild member is a coveted honor, but requires years of apprenticeship and mastery. Take, for instance, the blacksmith. You start as an apprentice, shadowing your mentor in a smoky forge, learning to shape swords, horseshoes, and tools. Your hands soon grow tough, your eyes keen, but the pressure to produce flawless work is intense. A single defective horseshoe could mean disaster. Knights depend on their mounts in battle, and failure might mean a rider's fall or your own swift punishment from guild overseers. Life is governed by the seasons, each bringing its own challenges. Harvest time is particularly brutal, a period of mad urgency when every able hand must drop other tasks to gather crops before the rains or early frosts destroy the yield. Missing the harvest isn't merely a loss of income. It threatens starvation come winter. The relentless march of the calendar shapes every aspect of life, from festival dates to market days and church services, binding community and labor in a cyclical, unforgiving pattern. Physical injuries are a constant hazard. Splinters from wooden tools, cuts from sickles, bruises from heavy lifting, and worse, lurk in every corner of work. With no modern medicine or antiseptics, even small wounds can become infected, turning into dangerous illnesses. Protective gear is minimal at best, and safety regulations are non-existent. You learn quickly to keep your fingers clear of sharp blades and avoid carrying loads so heavy they might crush you. Through it all, your body aches from the ceaseless effort. Every muscle protests, your back stiffens, your hands throb. You marvel at the resilience required to face day after day of such brutal labor without collapse. Yet this is the fabric of medieval work, relentless, unforgiving, utterly exhausting. Just as your muscles begin to ache from the day's relentless labor, another, far more insidious adversary looms, one you cannot see, taste, or smell. This enemy is everywhere. In the water you drink, the air you breathe, the food you eat, and the very surfaces you touch. Disease in the medieval world is an ever-present shadow stalking the population with silent, unseen menace. Unlike the tangible hardships of toil and weather, illness strikes unpredictably and swiftly, turning healthy bodies into wrecks within days or weeks. To survive, you learn to watch your step and guard your breath, knowing that a simple cough or a brief chill might be your last warning. Among the countless afflictions that ravage the medieval population, none is more infamous than the Black Death. A devastating bubonic plague that tore through Europe in the 14th century, wiping out roughly a third of the continent's people. This pandemic was a cataclysmic event, reshaping society and instilling a pervasive terror of infection. But even beyond this great plague, smaller outbreaks of diseases such as smallpox, measles, typhus, and various fevers were constant threats, flaring up in villages and towns with relentless regularity. Sanitation in medieval settlements was abysmal. Without knowledge of germs or microbes, people had no understanding of the true causes of illness. Instead, they subscribed to the prevailing miasma theory, the belief that disease was caused by bad air or noxious smells emanating from rotting matter, filth, and decay. To combat these invisible threats, people burned herbs, resins, and incense to purify the air. They carried pomanders, small scented balls or containers filled with fragrant substances, hoping the pleasant odors would protect them from illness. Of course, such methods were futile in the face of microscopic pathogens, but the rituals offered a psychological balm in a frightening world. Medicine in medieval times was a perplexing blend of superstition, religious ritual, and practical remedies, some useful, many harmful. One widely practiced treatment was bloodletting, where a barber surgeon or physician would cut a patient's veins to release excess humors, aiming to restore balance among the 4 bodily fluids believed to govern health. Far from being harmless, this often weakened the patient, sometimes hastening death. Other remedies included potions made from an unlikely mix of herbs, crushed minerals, and animal parts, concocted with varying degrees of success or simply placebo effect. Some of the medical beliefs and practices were downright bizarre by modern standards. For instance, certain doctors insisted that kissing a donkey's nose could cure particular ailments, a remedy you would surely avoid today. The boundary between medicine and magic was blurred, as healers incorporated charms, prayers, and rituals alongside herbal treatments. Hospitals, where they existed, were a far cry from the healing institutions of today. Often run by religious orders, these places functioned more as hospices or places of last refuge, where the sick were isolated and tended with prayer and penance, rather than effective medical care. Conditions were harsh, wards were overcrowded and filthy, offering little comfort or chance of recovery. Disease was not just a personal tragedy. It could bring entire communities and economies to their knees. The massive population loss from the plague caused labor shortages that shook the feudal system to its core. With fewer workers available, wages rose, social mobility increased, and centuries-old social structures began to erode. Fear of contagion altered daily life dramatically. People avoided the sick, quarantines were enforced with brutal rigor, and travel was restricted to curb the spread of illness. Even now, you feel a faint tickle in your throat, a subtle weariness creeping into your limbs. These early signs spark a deep unease. You realize that surviving medieval life demands vigilance, not only against visible dangers, but against the unseen agents of sickness and death. In such a world, it is no surprise that people clung fiercely to faith, superstition, and ritual, seeking comfort in the divine when human knowledge fell painfully short. After a day spent bent beneath the sun's relentless gaze, hauling, planting, forging, or mending, your weary bones long for rest. But fate has other plans. Today, your toils collide with the merciless machinery of medieval justice, a spectacle that is part theater, part terror, and wholly unpredictable. There is no legal counsel to plead your cause, no appeals to higher courts, no shield of fairness. Instead, your fate is proclaimed by the booming voice of the town crier, echoing through narrow streets filled with curious eyes and hungry ears. The crowd gathers, a seething mass eager for drama, for punishment, for the grim satisfaction of watching someone else's downfall. You might have committed the simplest of transgressions, a stumble that breaks a neighbor's prized chicken, a loaf of bread taken out of hunger's desperation, or a careless word that offends the local lord's pride. Yet these minor slips can lead to punishments swift and brutal, meted out with little regard for mercy or reason. The medieval courts are not bastions of justice as you know them. They are instruments of social control. Their purpose is less about fairness and more about maintaining order, often through public displays designed to shame, humiliate, and intimidate. Stocks, pillories, and whipping posts stand as grim fixtures in the village square, their presence a constant reminder of the price of transgression. To be locked in the stocks means enduring not just the physical discomfort of immobility, but the jeers, laughter, and scorn of the assembled crowd. People come to these punishments as if attending a festival, some with cruel delight, others with pity, but all under the same spell of communal spectacle. One of the most feared penalties is branding or mutilation, a permanent mark of disgrace carved into flesh. Ears may be cropped, noses sliced away, or other cruel marks inflicted as a lasting reminder of guilt. Execution, the ultimate sentence, is reserved for grave offenses: murder, treason, heresy. The methods of death are varied and brutal, from hanging by the neck to the slow beheading of the axe. Yet even in these severe punishments, justice is uneven. Your social standing shapes your sentence. Nobles may receive a mere reprimand for crimes that would condemn commoners to the gallows by sunset. Historians debate whether medieval justice was chaotic disorder or a necessary deterrent in a harsh and brutal world. Likely, it was a volatile blend of both, a system riddled with corruption, superstition, and inconsistency, yet one that provided a framework to check the anarchy of daily life. Among the stranger customs was the trial by ordeal, a practice that would chill the bones of any modern defendant. The accused might be forced to hold a red-hot iron or be cast into a river, their innocence judged by survival or divine intervention. The sheer terror of these trials underscores the desperation for truth in a world lacking scientific understanding. Thankfully, such practices faded over time, but the memory remains a stark reminder of how justice once danced dangerously close to superstition. Justice in medieval towns could involve professional judges and executioners, figures both feared and respected. Yet in many rural regions, law was dispensed by local lords or village elders, wielding power as they saw fit. Bribery, favoritism, and superstition often swayed verdicts, turning the law into a tool for personal vendettas or local politics. You watch, heart heavy, as a neighbor is dragged to the stocks for a petty theft. Their cheeks flush crimson under the hot gaze of the crowd, the stench of rotten eggs and insults raining down. The humiliation is palpable, a punishment designed not to rehabilitate, but to crush spirit and deter others. Justice here is a public performance, a grim pageant to enforce control through fear and spectacle. So, if ever you find yourself on the wrong side of medieval law, steel yourself. The scales of justice are not balanced for mercy. You will need luck, cunning, and perhaps the favor of powerful allies to navigate this brutal world. Your day begins under the unblinking gaze of a power that transcends kings and nobles. The Church. In medieval times, faith was far more than a Sunday obligation. It was the rhythm that beat through every moment, the invisible script guiding your steps from dawn until sleep. The Church's shadow, long and dense, stretches over your entire existence. It is the rule book and refuge, the judge and comforter, the invisible thread binding the community in shared belief and fear. Even before the first pale light of morning touches the village, you are stirred from sleep by the distant tolling of bells. The dawn prayers call you forth, soft murmurs rising into chants that echo through the quiet streets and into the stone walls of your home. Rising from your rough mattress, you dress in the plain garments suitable for a humble life, but your heart carries the weight of ritual. To miss these prayers would not just mean disrespect, but a fracture in the delicate spiritual armor that guards your soul. Your steps lead you to the village church, an austere yet commanding structure of cold gray stone. The building is more than stone and timber. It is the heart of your community. Inside, the chill air is tinged with the fragrant smoke of burning candles and incense, curling upward like prayers themselves. The priest's voice booms in Latin, a language you barely understand, yet you follow the rhythm, the kneeling, the crossing of yourself, the solemn chorus of Amen that binds the congregation together in unison. The church marks the milestones of your life with equal solemnity. It is where your newborn is baptized, an act believed not merely to welcome the child into the Christian fold, but to ward off the evil spirits rumored to lurk in unbaptized souls. This ritual is no mere tradition. It is a shield against a hostile spiritual realm that could claim your child's innocence and your family's blessing. Historians debate whether this omnipresent faith was a comfort that soothed medieval anxieties or an oppressive tool wielded to control and conform. But for you, it is both a lifeline and a burden. Throughout the year, religious festivals punctuate the relentless grind of work. They bring moments of solemnity and celebration, lifting spirits with parades, feasts, and communal prayer. Yet these festivals also come with hardships. During fasting periods, Lent, Advent, and others, food becomes scarce and simple. Fish or bread, sometimes nothing but water and herbs. Hunger pangs accompany your prayers, a physical penance that deepens your sense of devotion and discipline. The calendar is crowded with saints' days, holy weeks, and feast days. Each comes with its own prescribed rituals and expectations. You must prepare your heart and body accordingly, learning the stories of saints, the mysteries of the faith, and the proper ways to honor them. Religion and superstition entwine, blurring the line between doctrine and folklore. Charms and amulets are carried for protection, unlucky numbers avoided, miracles and curses believed with equal conviction. Pilgrimages are a common expression of faith. Though arduous and perilous, these journeys to distant holy sites offer spiritual renewal and a chance to prove one's devotion. Travelers face bandits, illness, and harsh conditions, their faith tested as much by the journey as by the destination. The Church's influence extends to knowledge itself. Priests are among the few who can read and write, controlling education and literacy. This power over knowledge grants them enormous authority in the village. While your schooling may have been limited to memorizing prayers and hymns, these religious teachings shape your worldview and daily choices. As evening falls and you kneel once more in prayer, the flickering candlelight casts long shadows across the stone floor. The chants rise and fall like waves, soothing yet heavy with the weight of faith and fear. Religion here is a constant companion, binding your past, present, and future in a covenant that shapes every breath and every decision. It is both a sentence and a sanctuary, a source of strength and a reminder of human frailty. Your place in the medieval world is not just a matter of birth or luck. It is woven tightly into a sprawling, tangled hierarchy known as the feudal system. This structure shapes everything about your existence: who you are, who you serve, who commands your labor, and even what your future holds. You are not merely an individual, but a piece on a vast and complex chessboard where loyalty, land, and power are the currencies exchanged in a delicate, often dangerous game. One misstep, one whispered betrayal, one neglected duty, and your fate can flip like a poorly tossed coin, plunging you into hardship or perhaps elevating you for a fleeting moment. If you are a peasant, the backbone of this system, most of your life revolves around the land. You do not own it. The Lord does. He grants you a small plot to cultivate, a patch of earth that feeds your family and supports the greater estate. But this grant comes with heavy strings. You owe the Lord taxes, often in grain, produce, or labor. Long days are spent in the fields, tilling soil, sowing seeds, and harvesting crops not just for your own table, but for the Lord's coffers. Sometimes you might be called to serve in the Lord's militia, taking up arms in defense of his lands or interests. Your freedom is limited. The right to move freely, to leave the land, or seek opportunity elsewhere is bound by legal and social chains. Escape is fraught with risk and often forbidden outright. The social ladder here is not a gentle climb, but a sheer cliff face. Moving upward is rare, difficult, and dangerous. Above the peasants stand the lords, men of wealth, land, and power, who command the allegiance of the village and the surrounding region. These lords themselves are vassals to higher nobles, or, ultimately, the king. The king holds the crown of ultimate authority, a symbol of power that radiates outward. Yet in far-flung villages like yours, the king's reach is often more ceremonial than practical. Instead, local politics swirl in a complex dance of alliances, betrayals, marriages, and wars. Families rise and fall, territories shift hands, and loyalties are bought, sold, or broken. Historians continue to debate whether feudalism was a rigid, caste-like system or a more flexible network of negotiated obligations and mutual benefits. Among the curious customs of court life was the presence of jesters, unofficial truth-tellers who, beneath the mask of humor, could speak truths to the nobility that others dared not voice. Their jests might mock the king or the lords, but the laughter they provoked carried a dangerous edge. For you, the peasant, such luxuries are unknown. Your daily concerns are far less glamorous, focused on hauling crops, mending tools, and steering clear of trouble. Tales of knights clad in shining armor, galloping heroically into battle, often circulate in the village. These stories capture the imagination, painting knights as noble warriors defending honor and justice. Yet the reality is more complex and often less romantic. Knights are a blend of warriors, landowners, and nobles, balancing the brutal demands of combat with the responsibilities of managing estates and overseeing vassals. Vassals, in turn, are lesser lords or knights who swear fealty and military service to more powerful lords in exchange for land and protection. This web of relationships is a constant balancing act, where power is both wielded and negotiated. Betrayal, failure to uphold obligations, or disloyalty can bring swift and harsh consequences. Loss of land, status, or even life is a risk woven into every oath. Loyalty is not merely expected, it is enforced, often through violence or legal pressure. Trust is a fragile commodity, and survival demands careful navigation of these loyalties. As you pause to rest your aching back after a long day's labor, you reflect on your place in this grand design. Your life is rarely your own. It is a series of debts and duties, obligations owed and received, all wrapped in a social order engineered to concentrate power firmly in the hands of a privileged few. Freedom is measured by service, and identity is defined by allegiance. As the sun dips below the horizon and the shadows lengthen, you might imagine that evening brings rest, a chance to put down your tools and sink into quiet comfort. But in medieval times, the day's end often marked the beginning of a very different kind of experience. Entertainment was not the gentle, passive affair of modern couch potatoes binge-watching a favorite series. Instead, it could be bizarre, raucous, and at times downright brutal. After a long day spent in relentless toil, you and your neighbors seek distractions that, by today's standards, would seem strange, if not unsettling. There were no plush armchairs or streaming services to offer solace here. Your idea of fun might be watching a fight break out in the village square, playing strange games that test both endurance and luck, or enduring a noisy festival where chaos reigns and your patience is stretched thin. The day's grime and sweat mingle with the noise and spectacle, creating a sensory overload unlike anything a modern audience would expect. Public spectacles were central to medieval amusement. For the nobility, grand jousts and tournaments dazzled the eyes. A dazzling display of armored knights charging on horseback, lances aimed true, banners fluttering, and crowds roaring. These were elaborate affairs, where knights competed not just for honor, but for prizes and prestige. The nobles reveled in the pageantry and martial prowess on display, their courts alive with celebration. But for the common folk, entertainment was more raw and less glamorous. Cockfights, where roosters with razor-sharp spurs tore into each other, drew blood and bets alike. Bear baiting, an event where a chained bear was set upon by dogs, was a grisly spectacle that captivated and horrified in equal measure. The cruelty was stark, and yet it was considered a highlight of the season. Public executions added a macabre dimension to entertainment. Watching condemned criminals face their grim fates was a communal event, a harsh lesson served with a side of grim fascination. You shudder at the thought, but also wonder if such violent distractions may have dulled the edge of your own daily stresses. One particularly unruly pastime was mob football, a chaotic rough game played across villages with almost no rules. Imagine a mass of people surging through muddy streets, jostling and pushing, all fighting to move a ball toward a distant goal. The game could last hours or even days, with injuries, bruises, and broken bones, an accepted risk. Whether mob football is the direct ancestor of modern soccer or rugby remains debated among historians, but it stands as a vivid example of medieval revelry. Equal parts sport, spectacle, and sheer chaos. When the crowd thinned and the day quieted, you might find solace in storytelling and music. Bards and minstrels roamed from village to village, weaving enchanting tales of heroes, gods, monsters, and magic. These stories were a tapestry of fact, legend, and fantasy, shaping the community's understanding of the world and their place within it. Gathered around a flickering fire, listeners leaned close, drawn into worlds where the impossible felt almost real. You might also notice an unusual hobby among some, a fascination with collecting oddities. Whether trophies from hunts or exotic keepsakes from distant travels. These objects connected people to stories, histories, and identities. Nobles especially prized stuffed crocodiles or strange animals, symbols of power, mystery, and far-flung influence. That same fascination once led to the bizarre practice of using crocodile dung as sunscreen, a reminder of the medieval blend of curiosity, superstition, and practical necessity. So, while medieval entertainment was rarely cozy or gentle, it provided moments of escape, unity, and even joy amidst a harsh life. Yet after the grime, the noise, and the bloodshed, you wonder, how much revelry can the body and soul truly endure, and what, if any, comfort does such diversion really offer? By now, you are painfully aware that medieval life is not a gentle stroll through sunlit meadows, but a relentless gauntlet of challenges, a daily trial that tests body, mind, and spirit beyond what you imagined possible. From the moment the pale dawn steals across the sky to the creeping shadows of evening, your day is packed with burdens that weigh heavier with each passing hour. Your mornings begin before the sun rises, rousing you from whatever restless sleep the night granted. Your clothes, scratchy wool and coarse linen, itch mercilessly against your skin, never truly clean, always roughened by dirt and sweat. Dressing is no small comfort, but a necessity for braving the chill and grime of the day. Food is scarce and simple. You eat to survive, not to savor. The barley porridge, thick and unappealing, barely fuels the arduous labor ahead. Hunger gnaws at you, a constant companion, whispering reminders of scarcity and the precarious balance between enough and nothing. Work exacts a brutal toll. Your back aches from the relentless physical labor, stooping over fields or wielding crude tools that blister your hands. Skin is perpetually stained with dirt and roughened by the elements, and no amount of smoky fires or herbal sachets can mask the pervasive scent of the farmyard that clings to your clothes and hair. Above all else, the shadow of death looms nearby. Disease, in forms you cannot see or fully understand, stalks the village. The plague, fevers, infections, any could strike with sudden and merciless force. The threat of violent punishment waits just as patiently, ready to descend at a lord's whim or as penance for a misstep. Social life offers little refuge. The watchful eyes of the Lord, the church, and even neighbors ensure that freedom is tightly circumscribed. Your every decision is a delicate balance between survival and obedience, a dance with power and tradition that leaves scant room for personal choice. Traveling is fraught with danger. Bandits, harsh terrain, and illness lie between you and any distant hope. Education is a rare treasure, mostly out of reach, and roles, especially for women, are strictly defined and enforced. Yet, even in this world of hardship, medieval people found moments of joy, pockets of community and celebration that offered relief. Festivals burst with noisy games and feasts. Storytelling by firelight brought shared wonder and laughter, and the hope for a better tomorrow kept spirits alive. Make no mistake, this world demanded resilience. Endurance was not a virtue, but a requirement, and a thick skin was necessary both literally and figuratively. So if you ever find yourself romanticizing the past, pause and consider this. You would likely not last a single day in medieval times. The comforts of modern life, clean water, reliable food, health care, legal protections, are luxuries beyond the wildest dreams of those who lived before. They survived through sheer necessity, hard labor, and the sometimes cruel grace of fate. As dusk settles and your eyelids grow heavy, allow the harshness of medieval life to fade like smoke rising from the hearth. Imagine instead a gentler world, a place where you can rest without fear, breathe air untainted by filth, and enjoy the peace earned through safety and ease. Sleep well, knowing you have journeyed far and glimpsed a world both brutal and inspiring, a world you'd never want to call home. Now the day winds down slowly. The harsh clamor of the village fades to distant murmurs. You settle into your rough bed, the smoke loosening its grip on your lungs, the biting cold softening to a gentle warmth. Muscles unwind, the incessant itchiness dulls, and the odors of the day dissolve into the night air. In this quiet moment, you taste the promise of clean air, feel the comfort of modern luxuries, and drift on a calm river of thought, free from the burdens of survival, disease, hunger, and fear. Close your eyes gently now. Let the soft hum of the night carry you into peaceful sleep, where dreams are untroubled by struggle or pain. You have journeyed far tonight and deserve this calm. Good night and sweet dreams.